Recording's on.
Yeah,
we're on.
I managed to find it. Yeah. So Alex isn't with us this week, so we thought I'd take the opportunity to show what he's up to this Friday and his bonfire shenanigans. I think that's probably a bottle of Pinot Grigio that he's actually got there rather than a beer. But yeah, welcome to Tech First. Really pleased that you made it this morning. And I'm one of your hosts, Paul Bailey. Also design thinking dad, head of design for Spark here in Notts, and full-time developer of 4 Tiny Humans. But I'm also joined by the lovely Yvette.
Yes, hello. Yeah, so I'm a BA by trade. I do a lot of sort of end-to-end processes, development in other businesses and stuff like that. I've got a really keen interest in design and methodologies and stuff like that, agile and stuff like that. So yeah, really enjoy these talks and stuff. So yeah.
And we've been running not Tech First. Tech First has been going for about almost 3 years now. Wow. And essentially we're a flock of techie, designy, people-centered, coffee-loving people that get up early, who get together once a month or so, and hopefully we have breakfast or coffee or something, and listen to somebody from the local area talk about something they're passionate about, which is kind of loosely related to design and tech. We'd like to be in the office at some point in the future. Who knows? Maybe we'd try an experiment hybrid. Yeah. But actually, it's great because I think we've got people joining today that are from all over the place, not just Nottingham, and you can do it from the comfort of your own home in your pajamas. So we want to try and help you start the day right with a little insight and maybe a little bit of light entertainment. And today we've got a really amazing talk with Lex Lofthouse, who's going to talk about design for developers. And she's already explained why she's an advocate for Comic Sans, although I think we need to dig into that a little bit more. Alec is not with us, unfortunately, today. He's on the train somewhere to Birmingham, but he will be back with us next month. As we're going through the event today, we are on Tech Nottingham Slack channel, and Yvette's going to be doing the best to kind of say hello to everybody who's using that and answer any questions that you've got on there. We also are on Twitter, but Alec is our Twitter person, our Twitterer, is that a thing? So we won't be as responsive on that platform today. So if you do tweet us on there, please be patient and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. All of the videos, apart from Chris's, which will soon be on there, will be on our YouTube channel as well. And we've got a whole bunch of talks at, I guess, since like March last year now. Rob Van Tol's talk on home working, and Pete Gallagher's talk on the history of IoT. I think our top viewers, Yvette's not far behind, I don't think. When you're talking about we're in a transformation.
That's my mum.
Yeah. But yeah, if you enjoyed today's talk, have a look at some of the other speakers that we've had over the last year. We've had a really good mixture, and there's some really great talks there. Next month, we're going to be doing something a bit different. So I'm really excited about this because I think the last year or so has been, it's been a challenge, I think, for a lot of meetup groups, and the folks at Nottingham, Tech Nottingham are actually bringing all the meetup groups together in like a big seasonal celebration. So I'm not quite sure exactly what it is going to be, but there's going to be quizzes, there's going to be games, there's going to be prizes. And I think it's a really great way for us all to kind of come together and celebrate all the good stuff that happens in the Nottingham and kind of East Midlands tech and design area. So we're really excited to be a part of that.
So yeah, so obviously I did a talk ages ago now, and then we get so many different talks and stuff, and we're always looking for more. So if you're like super passionate about what you do, or if you've done something phenomenal recently, even if you haven't done something phenomenal recently and you want to kind of develop your skills, you want to speak at Not Tech Fast, please get in touch either through the Slack channel, contact Paul directly through the email, because we are really wanting to support the local community and give you opportunity to speak about something you're passionate about, like Lex or others, and it's a really good entryway into speaking. So if you've kind of got that like kind of itch where you want to start doing a bit more public speaking, or you want to kind of become the expert of your field, then please use this avenue to get in touch with us. Or if you want to hear different talks as well, just let us know if there's any subjects that you kind of want us to kind of search out as well. because like essentially Not Text Fast is to help support you guys in the local community. So if there's stuff that we can do to help you do that, please get in touch and just let us know, because I'm always happy to talk to everybody, so feel free to contact me wherever, and we'll get you lined up. We are fully booked now until next year, and we've got some really good speakers coming up as well. We've got visual thinking coming up. I think Paul's trying to get a magician lined up as well, which is going to be super interesting. So again, it is tech sort of design subjects, but again, the kind of doors are open for you guys if you want to kind of use this as a stepping stone to get in as well. So get in touch. Also, we've managed to get Paul to do his How to Design in Autumn 2022. Now, this is how I first met Paul, actually, is sort of through one of his previous talks, and it is awesome. Like, this year has been quite challenging, as was last year, and Paul does this phenomenal talk where he kind of gets you to kind of redefine the defect mold. So definitely put this one in your diary. That's going to be coming up in January. And I'm really, really excited about that one. He's got some practical ideas just to kind of make 2020 really good as well. So definitely attend that one, because that's going to be super exciting. And yeah, that leads us into Lex's talk today. So I recently saw Lex at DDD's Midlands event, and I was absolutely blown away by some of the content, and it's really simply put, and it's absolutely revolutionized my Instagram account now. Like, it looks so professional, it's unreal, and that's all down to Lex. And hopefully, even at the end of this, even if you're not a designer, you're not a developer, there will be something you take out of this, guaranteed, because it's such an amazing talk. And with that, I'll pass it on to Lex to introduce herself, and I hope everyone enjoys it.
Hello. Right, I should get my screen share going. There we go. So I am going to whiz through this introduction because I'm very aware of what time everyone's got before they start work or such. So yeah, like Paul said, this Design for Developers is a bit of a whistle-stop tour of design principles, applications, especially relevant for the web. And I wanted to write this talk because I've worked with a lot of developers in the past who've all kind of asked me to share some tips and tricks with them on how to create better designs, sometimes because they've wanted to create designs for themselves, or they've been in a position where they've kind of had to be the developer and the designer at the same sort of time. So that's kind of what inspired writing the talk. So brief intro about me. I am Lex Lofthouse. I use she, her pronouns, and my handle on almost everything is Loftio. And I'm a designer. So I've been a designer for 10 years now, almost 11 now. It's getting on. And I moved to Nottingham in 2011. I studied graphic design in Aberdeen, which is where I'm originally from. And now I work at an agency called Enzyme, which is in Nottingham. Mostly I specialise in web design, but I do also work in brand and print, and recently a bit of video as well. So yeah, a bit of an all-rounder, but mostly kind of specialise in web design. So I've got a small chunk of time here, so I'm not going to be teaching you everything I've learned in all my years of graphic design education or 10 years of experience. It's not a comprehensive overview of everything it takes to be a designer, unfortunately, but I think we all know that. I'm also not going to teach any code-based technique. I don't really code. Most of the time I hand my designs over to a front-end developer because they're way better at that than I am. So I'm not going to be teaching anything about that. What this talk is, I will be going through some fundamental principles of design, common design elements and tips on how to implement those. And finally, just some examples, some kind of before and after examples of how we can apply some of these principles to improve and refine existing front-end designs. So let's start with the principles of design. So there's no real law about how many principles there are. Some will say there's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I feel like these 4 are enough and they're relevant for you to consider and remind yourself of when it comes to designing for the web. So they are hierarchy, proximity, contrast, and balance. So let's look into what each of these mean. So hierarchy, this is similar to how we think of hierarchy in business and society and nature as well. It's a system in which things are arranged according to their importance. So in design, we achieve this visually by creating elements and then putting them in a clear order of priority. In development, a common way of doing this is creating a sense of hierarchy with text headings. So your H1, H2, H3, they're all named in the order, in the hierarchy order, and they are styled as such as well. So H1 will be the most prominent, H2 will be the next, and so on. That follows the principle of hierarchy. It's a relatively easy principle to implement as well, because there's a few ways to do it. One of the easiest ways is scale. So the biggest thing is the most important on the page, but there are other ways we can do that as well, including where we place things on the page as another big one, which leads me nicely on to the second design principle, which is proximity. So proximity is actually part of a larger set of principles called Gestalt principles. And I hope I've said that right, probably saying it wrong. But they were discovered back in the first half of the 20th century by psychologists. They were trying to study how we make sense of the world and how we decide whether things belong together. And they found that proximity of objects had a major part in that. So when it comes to design, proximity is looking at the content, understanding the relationships that those pieces of content have with each other, and then placing them in a way that makes that make sense. So the distance or the lack of distance in between objects helps us understand their connection to each other. This helps us group and organize things on a page in order to demonstrate those connections. So to use text as an example again, if we have a heading with a paragraph of text sitting closely underneath it, you can safely say that those two things belong together because of their proximity to each other. That heading is probably going to introduce what the next paragraph of text is speaking about. So that's proximity. So next principle, contrast. So contrast is a principle we use to help emphasize objects in our design. We can highlight elements against each other. And this is achieved by having things be the opposite to each other or close enough to appear opposite. Doesn't have to always be super technically opposite. Contrast can be used in different ways. Sometimes we'll use it for emphasis. And in some ways that kind of comes back to that hierarchy principle too. We might really want to highlight something on the page, and by contrasting that with something else, that makes that first element really stand out. It gives it some importance. Other times contrast is just a crucial part of the interface. So we can use contrast really simply when it comes to text again. Black text on a white background, great contrast, and it just makes that really easy to read. So that's just more of a kind of crucial way of using contrast in order to make your design legible. And contrast doesn't always apply to color either. It can be achieved in other ways, such as juxtaposing font styles or using different scales in our lines and shapes. The key thing about contrast is that it helps the user know where to look because it creates a form of visual impact. Lastly is balance. Now there's two types of balance when we talk about design principles. There's symmetrical balance and there's asymmetrical balance. Both rely on elements working alongside each other. And balance provides structure to your page layout. It's weight distributed across your design by the placement of elements. Symmetrical balance means that you have a design that's very evenly displayed. There's kind of an invisible center line that you can imagine down the middle. And this type of balance relies on the elements being equal to each other, like a balanced set scales. It offers a really satisfactory and consistent layout. Plus it's quite easy to get right as well. Asymmetrical balance is more about kind of tension on the page, where the elements offset each other a little bit more. And it results in a kind of unequal visual weight. Offers some visual variety, but still maintains that sense of balance. Bit more dynamic, bit more interesting, invokes that feeling of movement. But the downside here is that it's a little more complex to get right, to get that kind of balance within your design. So these are our 4 design principles. And the idea with these is to always keep them in mind, because they're kind of the key to creating a good design. If we're talking in terms of Lego, these are the instructions. And now I want to introduce some of the kind of building blocks that go into design, the actual Lego pieces. So I'm going to call them design elements. You can call them whatever you want, but these are the Lego pieces that go into your design. So I'll keep it simple again, and I'll split this into 4 key areas. Got typography, color, imagery, and layout. So these 4 visual design elements implemented alongside your principles are kind of your good instructions into and Lego into creating a good design. So 4 design principles, 4 elements, easy. So I want to run through what each of these are and some good tips for how you can use each. So I'll start with typography. So typography is the art and technique of arranging type. Typography takes the content, we apply font choices, we apply spacing, color, and layout. So step 1 in typography is fonts. So typography isn't just the fonts, but it does include them. A lot goes into typography, but this is the first kind of step that you need to get right. So how do you decide on fonts that you're going to use? So it depends what you're working on. You might not need to choose any fonts at all. You might be working with a brand that already dictates this. Great, if so. However, you might be faced with the choice yourself. So how do you do that? Typically, I would suggest choosing a font pairing for your project if you have to start from scratch. I'll call this easy mode for setting up some type styles. So choose 1 font for headings and choose 1 font for body copy. It keeps things simple. Sometimes people choose more, sometimes people choose less, but I'd say this is an easy kind of way of starting to set your type styles. So headings, you can be a bit braver with this choice, because headings are usually shorter, larger, attention-grabbing pieces of copy. You can choose a font that really represents the brand in a certain way. You can get away with a bit more of a display font with a bit more decoration to it. And your body copy, this needs to be a bit simpler. Essentially, this is going to be used to in larger paragraphs of copy and usually at a smaller size. So it needs to be easy to read. A simple serif or sans serif font is great for this. And you can try it out at different sizes, especially smaller ones, to see if it works. It's important that whatever font you use, you ensure that you're getting the correct license for them. So always do a bit of research with that. Or alternatively, you could choose a free to use font. My favorite resource when we talk about free to use fonts is Google Fonts. Free to use, easy to embed, small files, good performance. And the website here, fonts.google.com, is a great tool to look through your options. There is over 1,000 fonts on there, so there's plenty to choose from. So if you're choosing fonts, you need to kind of ensure that they work well together. And that comes down to knowing the brand that you're working on. So fonts should either embody the brand or complement the style or tone of that brand. So if you have a tech brand, for example, a font that has a nice modern feel to it is enough. If you're working on a brand for kids, a nice rounded font will work just great. So you wouldn't choose Comic Sans to design a really important like warning sign, or would you? So I would just like to show you some examples of font pairings in the next few slides that can help you make these decisions. So I'm going to use some famous Nottingham landmarks to do so. So here's an example for Nottingham Castle. This location has heritage, it has history. So the heading font that I've chosen here helps us convey that type of tone. It kind of echoes the style of type from that era, and it's got some nice character to it. It's really good for heading styles. The body copy font here is different. I wouldn't choose the same font. I've chosen to complement the heading font with a nice classic serif font. It's easier to read at smaller sizes, and these pair quite well together, given that kind of historic feel. Helps convey that brand at a glance, just looking at some copy. So to keep things dead simple, I've just chosen all Google fonts here to demonstrate. Secondly, this is an example for Nottingham Contemporary. So we're looking at a more modern style of font here, chosen for the heading. Bold, eye-catching, has some good character to it, and it also can represent that gallery's modern style as well. And I've paired this with a really basic serif font. Again, complements that modern style, but is also really easy to read, especially when we get down to smaller text sizes. So if you're ever looking for a really easy choice for a sans serif font, Open Sans is great. Really versatile kind of font. It is the Helvetica of Google fonts, essentially. So lastly, let's look at Attenborough Nature Reserve. So I've chosen this heading style. It's fun display font. It almost feels a bit handwritten and natural. I've set it in the green to help convey that tone of the brand. And I've paired this with a serif font. However, I think this one could work equally well with Open Sans as well. So there's not always one answer at all when it comes to fonts or design in general. But there are some wrong ones, like that Comic Sans example. So just bear in mind the tone of your brand when you're choosing fonts. So there is another tool which is good to help you with this. Fontjoy.com helps you pair fonts together. And I'll share all my slides at the end of this, rather than banging on about all these tools, but there's loads of resources in here to help. So type styles, once we've got our font pairing, we've got to do something with them now. So we can apply these font choices and create some text styles. So our heading font, great, we've chosen it. We need to set our heading styles now. And in order to do that, we need to look at that hierarchy principle in order to achieve it. So set our heading styles. I've got two examples here to show you how we can do that with the same font. Our example on the left just uses scale in order to create that hierarchy. So the largest heading is heading 1, decreases down in size down to heading 4. And the naming convention obviously follows that sense of hierarchy. Great. Sorry, that was my cat. The example on the right uses the same principle. It uses scale, but we've also added a little bit more interest in that third one. We've used a kind of italic font. And then in the fourth, we've got all caps with a bit more character spacing. So they still maintain the same sense of hierarchy. We're using the same font for both these examples. Just shows you a couple of ways that you can create that sense of hierarchy in slightly different sort of ways. Sorry, my cat's going nuts. Don't know if you can hear her, but she's got the zoomies. Cool, so body copy. This is a slightly easier one to get right. Let's keep it dead simple. Once you've chosen a body copy font, it's good to test the sizing against your headings, but essentially I would usually create two sizes. I would create a large intro size, which is this first one here, and then I'd create a main body copy font. So this just needs to be really easy to read because it will be the most commonly used paragraph size. You can always add more styles as you go, but if you set up a range of heading styles and a couple of paragraph styles, you're in a good place with your type. So again, there's another great tool for this. This helps you set heading styles and then also test them out against body copy sizes as well. It's Google font friendly, and it just means that you don't have to download all these fonts. You can test them all out online first if you want to do that. So line height and paragraph spacing sounds really boring, but it's really, really important, especially when we're talking about our proximity principle. So line height is the space between lines on a page, continuous lines of copy. So here's 3 examples of different line heights that demonstrates the power of getting this right. So on this end of the scale, the line height's really small, makes text really difficult to read, just looks a bit wrong. It's not enough. And this can sometimes be our default line spacing, so please bear that in mind. Sometimes we really need to adjust this. On the other end of the spectrum is this line height is huge. When I was a junior designer, my mentor at the time said you could fit a bus through those lines because this is how I used to space type. In a different way, this makes the text hard to read. You have to cast your eye further down the page. So this example in the middle, our middle ground, is a lot closer to what we want to achieve. There's enough space to make it easy to cast your eye down to the next line and not lose your place. And it just makes it a lot easier to read. The space that we don't use is just as important as the space that we do. So it's important to try and get that balance right. It comes down to that proximity principle. If things are too far away from each other, your brain doesn't believe that they belong together. So the second is paragraph spacing. So this is the space before and after paragraphs as well. So here we have two examples. The one on the left, not so great. The one on the right, a lot more along the lines of what you want to do. So let's break that down. So on the right are spacing between the paragraphs of body copy, and between the first heading and paragraph should be about the same. So this makes it look, makes it very obvious that this text belongs together with enough of a pause between the paragraphs and the heading. And then the space after the paragraph needs to be slightly more so that it separates each block of text, gives the user a moment of pause, and it groups our areas of text in the right sort of way. If we compare that to the example on the left, we start to see why paragraph spacing is so imperative. Here, all of our proximities are off. It's a bit difficult to see what element of text belongs with the next. So the proximity principle here, again, really key in helping the user digest that content properly. So getting paragraph spacing is a really important element in design. So we've got some typography tips under our belt. Let's move on to color. So what I'd like to cover is just some tips around creating a color palette. So again, like fonts, establish if you've got an existing color palette to start from. You might have a couple of colors, or you might need to start from scratch. So if you do, how do we choose those colors? My advice would be start with one color first, because choosing an entire palette can be really daunting. So if you have one main brand color that you could start from and build upon, that's where we should start. So this should be the main color you want to associate with your brand. Like EasyJet is orange and O2 is blue and Starbucks is green. That color is the one that you want to pull out. Then once you've got that, you can start to build out your color palettes. So like our fonts, it's good to have two. A primary color palette, not to be confused with primary colors, main color palette, and a secondary color palette as well. So the main one will be your most used colors in the design, and your secondary palette will be more supporting colors that are used a little less often. So the best way to showcase this, I think, would be to show you a real world example. So this is Uber's main color palette. So their main colors are black and white, a great pairing because they're very contrasting colors. Remember that contrast principle from the start. Color's a great way of achieving contrast, so it's important to consider that when creating your palette. But they also have a third main color, which I would call like an accent color, which is blue. And this is used quite frequently throughout the brand, but in a very considered way. It helps represent their brand values, especially around safety. So here's an example of that in action. The example on the left is the Uber website. So, black and white, great for the contrast here, but the blue is also used to pull out some of their main product features. And on the right is the Uber app. So this mainly uses the black and white again, great for contrast. But we see that blue used really minimally, but really effectively. It draws your eye immediately to the fact that you've got a notification on there. So that's the main palette. They also have a secondary palette. This contains twice as many colors, but they're used probably half as often. They're mostly used in their illustrations to help support the brand. And they work well with that primary palette as well. So here we can see those colors and shades of being used. So this kind of structure of palettes is not only used for contrast, but it also helps define a hierarchy. The secondary palette is typically used for supporting elements, illustrations, and the main palette is used for the main interface. So there's hierarchy in the way that the color palettes are used. And Uber never deviate from these colors, really. Keeps the brand recognizable. And it's the way that they've created their color palettes is a really kind of solid approach. Add some neutral tones. So lastly, I think this is quite beneficial if you want to add some layering and depth to your designs. So Uber does this within their app. They use some neutral shades of gray to help kind of give some depth to the app and help enhance that kind of interface, especially where there's interactions. And neutrals doesn't necessarily mean gray. It can just be lighter shades of your existing colors within the color palette. But just think about that when creating a color palette as well. So again, there's some great tools I would recommend for this. This is Adobe's color tool. This is really helpful in creating color palettes. There's another tool as well called Coolers. It's a bit more random, but is a great sort of tool for that. Lastly, accessibility. I'm not the person to come and listen to about a big talk about accessibility, but I just want to bring it up when we talk about color. As a designer, color is the lowest bar to get right in terms of accessibility standards. So we've got to make sure that we're at least testing for this, because it's very easy to get this wrong if you have unimpaired vision. Very, very easy to get it wrong. So I use WebAIM for checking that my colors are contrasting enough for people to read on the web. It lets you enter in a foreground and a background color and see if those pass the standards there. But yes, there's a lot of other people who speak in a lot more detail about accessibility that I would recommend that you hear. So I'm just aware of time. I'm trying to power through. Power through. So I'll briefly discuss imagery. So I'll break this down into photography and iconography. So photography, it's likely that you might have some stuff to work with, but if you don't, you might have some questions about, do I need some more photography? Do the photos I already have, are they high enough quality? Where can I source additional images? So it's important to take stock of that to begin. Speaking of stock, you might feel like you need to add some photography, and a good way of doing that without having to organize a shoot is stock photography. It's important to source licensed photography for your project because you might get in trouble. Don't be pulling photos off of Google Images because you'll probably, someone will probably come and ask you to take it down. So make sure that you're looking for licensed photography. These are two really good resources to get some stock photography from. That's Unsplash and Pexels. They've got a really good range of images, and stock photography has come on a lot in the past few years. It used to be not so great. They used to be really, really cheesy, and there's a reason that a lot of memes originate from stock images. So please do be aware to try and avoid this really cheesy stock photography. The two examples that I've shown steer away from this a lot, but this used to be the standard of stock imagery. So let's say you've got some photography, fantastic. You need to kind of consider the treatment of these now. So how are you going to put these on the page? Sounds a bit odd, but you can add a bit of interest to your images if you need to. So first is thinking about the framing of the image. Are you going to crop these into portrait, landscape, square, or perhaps into some slightly different shapes? It's an important consideration to make. Not all photos work well in different frames or crops, so you really need to be mindful of this. Ensure that the focal point of your image is framed correctly, because it can add, good framing can add some really great visual interest into your design. You do not have to be limited to rectangles for that. Secondly, filters, effects, editing. You don't need Photoshop these days to do that anymore. There's a lot of resources out there. And filters can add a bit of interest to your imagery. Black and white, classic approach, but also can help add some consistency. Say if you've got photos all from different sources, if you apply the same sort of filter to them, that can add some consistency in those images. Alternatively, you could go for something a little more funky. This kind of duotone style is one that could incorporate your brand colors. It might be a little bit 2015 Spotify now, but it's a nice way to inject some interest into your photos. I did have a section about illustration, but I'm going to skip over that. So I'll touch briefly on icons as well. So iconography is an age-old way of communicating. We see it in our everyday life, in signage, and on the web. So icons are just simply symbols that help point us in the right direction. The main benefit of using icons is to give immediate context to the content, as well as signposting. So in digital design, you usually see icons accompanying actions, links, alerts, things like that. So I only really want to give you two major tips when it comes to icons, because it's not really rocket science. And I'm sure that you've implemented icons on your design before. So firstly, only use an icon on its own if it's clear enough to represent itself. Sometimes it's not very obvious to a user initially what an icon means. And it's very easy of us to assume that they know just because we're creating the design. So here's an example. These are some typical icons we might see on the web, and they're very familiar. Users will typically know what these mean. You know, 3 lines there is probably a menu. Magnifying glass is probably a search. Bin is going to represent a delete action. These are very common icons, what we would call universal icons. However, let's consider what these icons might represent. So the heart, is that a like? Is it add to wish list? Who knows? The second one looks like it's going to be a repost. It could be a refresh or something along those lines. And the last one could be an FAQ. It could open a live chat. It's not particularly clear, and these icons aren't as universal as those first. So we need to be really mindful of that when we're looking at icons. My best advice is to label the icons, accompany it with a bit of text. It'll make it very clear to the user what that icon does. Second bit is keep icons simple. These icons need to work at really small screen sizes. And if they're super detailed, then that can get lost when we shrink these down. Icons are typically void of intense detail for a reason, and they use just enough pixels to communicate the point. So if I take it back to that search icon, it's a very basic line icon, but it can be recognized even at the kind of smallest of sizes because of its simplicity, and that is the making of a great icon. So I'm not going to advocate for you creating icons if you don't need to, or if you don't feel skilled enough, but if you do, go for it. But these are two great resources for iconography as well. Font Awesome has some really great simple ones. And the Noun project is great because it's a very community-based one, so you can get loads of different styles of icons as well. So our last area is layout, and I don't know whether I should skip ahead on this. In fact, I'll go through. I did have a bit on grids here, but I think that's pretty common in development, so I'll skip that, but I will share these slides at the end. So I'll touch on components. So building a component starts with small elements, builds up to larger ones. You know, components are built of small pieces that can often form a repeatable element that we can reuse throughout pages. So in order to kind of explain this, I want to briefly touch on a framework called atomic design. So atomic design helps break down layouts into a system of smaller elements. So starting small, we have atoms. These are the smallest pieces of the interface. Then we have molecules, that's built up of two or more atoms. And then organisms are built up of 2 or more molecules. This then builds up to an entire page and page templates. So let's start with atoms. What are atoms? So atoms refer to the most basic building blocks for an interface, the singular elements. So that could be a label, that could be a text input, that could be a button. Like atoms in nature, they're really important, but not super useful on their own, kind of need to be put together. So that's where molecules come in. This is where 2 or more atoms combine. So those atoms, when put together, become a search bar. So once we start combining these smaller elements, we can start to build up bigger parts of the interface. So from molecules, then we move up to organisms. So this is made up of molecules combining. So that search bar is a molecule. We combine that with other atoms or molecules. We can start to create a menu here. So the logo, the text links, the search bar are all elements that are now coming together in a larger part of the interface. And you might add additional ones here. You might have a basket or an account if it's an e-commerce website. So this way of thinking about components just allows us to think about repeating and reusable elements. Here's an example of another molecule. This is a blog card on here. So if we break that down into its atoms, we start to see how we can build these components as well. So it's little elements that build up to big ones. And I think that's a really good approach when it comes to creating a design. Start small, build up to the bigger things. Don't try and tackle absolutely everything at once is the main takeaway here. So this is just showing how we can repeat those molecules and start to build up this, we can start to build up a blog listing page here from our small little atoms. So I just kind of wanted to whiz through that because I want to show a couple of examples really quickly here at the end of how we can improve our designs. So I'm going to take a couple of before and after examples just to show you. So this is a card for a property. So similar to a blog card, houses for sale, it's up on a website. We've got all the information we need here. We've got our price, we've got our location, we've got the specification, the image, and the contact details. But what we're really lacking here is some good hierarchy and some balance. So how can we improve that? So here's an example of one that's had a bit more love applied to it. So these cards display the exact same information, but with big differences in how that's communicated in the design. So we've made sure that the price is at the top and it's made the highest in scale. So it's got the most hierarchy. That's a pretty important piece of information. We've used some icons to help condense some of that busyness underneath. And in this context, these icons make sense. And we've used a bit of separation here with some neutral tones, like we spoke about with the color palette. So that contact information is now pulled out. We've included the logo within there for a bit of visual recognition. And then lastly, we've adjusted the controls on the image gallery. We've made them relevant to the image by placing them on top of it. It's very clear that they relate to the image. And we've also included some iconography there. So very subtle, small changes, but just things that we can do in order to improve kind of balance, contrast, proximity, the hierarchy as well. I'm just going to skip through to some examples, to one or two more examples, because I know that everyone's, so that there's time for some questions. So this is an example of how can we make a list of radio buttons more interesting. So it depends on the context it's designing for, but this is looking at a data plan. And we've got 3 options here, different data, different prices. So how can we make that more interesting? It's as simple as starting with the hierarchy here. What's the big difference between these choices that need highlighting the most? To the user, it's probably the amount of data. So let's make that the big differentiator here. And then let's reduce some of the other elements. We will keep the price bold because that needs to be very clear. But the name of the package isn't really particularly important. Let's make that a bit smaller. Secondly, we've put these choices into nice big blocks, creates a nice sense of balance within our layout, but also clearly separates them out. And then lastly, our selected state here gives us a huge level of contrast in comparison to our previous example. Previously, you can just see the radio buttons checked. With this, if you click one of these blocks, the entire block becomes outlined. And we also have an icon here, which helps indicate that it's been selected. So that just gives us a bit more contrast and shows us exactly what option's been chosen. Lastly, I won't go over the table. Lastly, I wanted to include an option that had a cat because I like cats. So this is a kind of hero section on a website. So here we've got an image to use, we've got a title, introduction, and 2 buttons, and also our menu to think about. So this is fine, but I can't really see the cat. So we really need to improve this so we can see the cat. So the biggest thing for me here is that the text is sort of readable on the left, but because we're using a bit of overlay, it doesn't provide us enough contrast and it obscures that image behind it a bit as well. So with our revised example, here I've looked at the kind of available space that we've got. We've got a background image that has a lot of space, so let's use that. We've moved the cat over to the right, gives us a better crop here of the image. And it gives us room to place the text very clearly on the left-hand side. And what we can do here is put the text in black, and that's very contrasting against the yellow. So it makes that text super easy to read. Secondly, for hierarchy with buttons, if you've got 2 buttons together, there's the option to make them a bit different so that you can make one more prominent than the other. Here, we've made the adopt a cat one the primary call to action, because of course you would. Why would you not want to adopt a lovely cat? And finally, I've kind of looked at the menu here as well. Not only have I used a bit of an overlay here to keep it clear, but I've also looked at what the main area is within that menu, and that would be the donate button. This is a charity, that is their main source of income. So let's pull out that donate button, but I've done it in yellow here so that it doesn't overpower the buttons below that as well. So ultimately, my before and afters are very subtle, they're very small changes, but they can make a really big difference. So whether that's a button, block text, all of these things have those 4 design principles in mind when I think about them. So the hierarchy of things on the page, the contrast has to be enough, the balance, and the proximity of where things sit as well. It all comes back to that. So that is all I've got time for. I know that there was hopefully time for questions, but I feel like I've maybe rambled on a bit too much.
Always time for questions.
I tried to condense this down, but didn't
good.
do too well.
I enjoyed the cat as well. The cat was a good good challenge as well. So yeah, if you've got any questions, if you want to put them in the question box, we'll be more than happy to pose them to Lex, or give you the opportunity to pose them to Lex yourself. So feel free to do that. As I say, I was just saying that you know, all these things that you've sort of said and best practice is absolutely great. because you can also see how people have done it really wrong as well, can't you? You know, like I was saying about the like the contrast, like it's great when you get it right and it really kind of has an impact, but when you get it wrong, it can get really wrong as well, can't it? So
yeah, it's an important one to get right, that just as well from that accessibility point of view as well, because you know, I'm not particularly hard of sight, and if you know, I can maybe take it for granted sometimes that people can read things just as well as I can, which is not the case. So
we had a really good talk from was it Helen that did the accessibility talk? Yeah, so I mean, if these two talks joined together, I mean, you've smashed it, haven't you? You've just smashed life, haven't you? That's that.
I got a question, Lex, because it's more about like what tools can people use, because obviously kind of professional tools and some of them probably quite expensive, but if you were looking at like doing some design work kind of on the cheap or without you know, buying a monthly Adobe license, what kind of things would people use?
So I mean, this is very specific around web design, so I would say that one of the better tools for that, if you want to do it cheaply, is Figma, because Figma has a free option, so it's, you know, it's designed to be for web design, and it's quite a powerful tool. Personally, I use Sketch, but Figma is very similar in what it does, and it's also web-based as well, so you don't particularly need the application for it. So I think Adobe XD is, I think that might be free as well. So either of those tools are, you know, two great options to use for designing for web.
It's awesome. So we've got a couple of people to say thanks. We've got some really helpful tips from this. You know, great talk. Thanks, Lex. So yeah, I think everyone's really benefited from it. No, I mean, I've heard it, I say before, but it's really interesting because you sort of pick up extra bits as you go along, don't you? And I know you had to skip a couple of slides as well, which were really, you know, it's a bit of a shame, but again, like, it's a great context. So make sure that everybody goes back and looks at the slides that Lex puts out as well, because there's some, like I say, the grid stuff was really interesting as well. I know you had to skip through that, but yeah, no, thank you, Lex. That's been awesome. Oh, we got yep.
Questions are coming in now. People are waking up.
Yeah.
Coffee's kicking in. Do you want to take the questions, Matt?
Yeah, no problem. So we've got some from Matt. Are we going to do an answer live?
Oh, yes.
Can we get him to speak? So we can ask him to ask it, actually.
Okay, Matt, get ready. You're going live. Okay, Matt, good morning.
So well, it's highly tuned. I'll read it out, and then obviously he can, if we get him on. But do you have any recommendations on where is best for people to learn more about these subjects? Also, this has been great, super interesting, and very well presented. Oh, he's here. I think he's here now. Anyway.
Yeah, I think I've been.
Spotlight surprise.
Yeah, no, this was actually brilliant. Some great ideas and ways of looking at things that I've not really touched upon before. So yeah, just wondering if there's anywhere specific that's really good for delving more deeply into each section.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess it depends on how you prefer to learn things. I learn from various different sources on these things. So sometimes kind of web articles, so like Smashing Magazine's a really good example. And it also kind of ties design and dev together, which is really good. I've learned a lot just from YouTube content, which I know is, you know, not an amazing example sometimes to say, but from the visual, because it's such a visual thing, watching kind of videos of people just going through and watching how other people create designs, I always find really, really interesting. Even as someone who's done it for so long, there's always new things to learn. So like I was kind of saying about how, you know, there's never one right answer when it comes to design. By kind of watching other people working, you just learn so much. You learn different ways of doing things. And then the last one, you know, I learn a lot from watching people do talks and workshops as well. which is another avenue to go down.
Are there any, so just on that, Lex, are there any not specific kind of design, you know, again, if it's meetups or talks or workshops and stuff like that, that people could like look into?
There
Maybe you should
is
start one.
what?
Maybe you should
So I
start
used to help organize a design exchange Nottingham,
yeah.
but it's been put on a bit of a pause, and isn't something that I help organize anymore. So I'm not really sure where that's at, but that was a great one for design. So yeah, it might come back.
Okay, that'll be good.
Charles Greenaway says he's a newbie and he started watching Dan Scott at bringyourownlaptop.com, which is probably worth checking out.
I'll check it out.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any. Is there any more? There's just like loads of people just saying thanks. You know, really enjoyed it. Thanks for the recommendations. Yeah. I don't think there's any more. But yeah.
Great. So shall we wrap things up?
Yeah, I think
9
so.
o'clock.
That's it. Yeah.
Thank you very much, everybody, for joining. Thanks, Lex, in particular. Really great talk, and we should catch up and talk about kerning and typography and you know, Comic Sans at some
Italic.
point.
Comic Sans italic.
So stuck on why.
Brilliant. No, thanks everyone. Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
and
and
we'll see you
hopefully we'll
next
see you
time.
all at the Christmas special next month.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, then,
Great.
guys.
Have a great day.
Have a great day. Bye.
Bye.